Your boots are caked in mud, your cloak soaked through from cold drizzle. Wolves prowl beyond the tree line. Bandits stalk the lonely roads, and your strength is failing. Just as darkness closes in, you see it. A lantern swinging outside a crooked building, a painted sign creaking in the wind, firelight spilling through warped shutters. You push open the door. Heat and smoke hit you at once. The smell of sweat, unwashed wool, and bitter ale fills your lungs. The hall explodes with life, men roaring over dice games, women singing in drunken chorus, wooden mugs slamming onto scarred tables. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, peasants and merchants, pilgrims and soldiers, thieves and cutthroats all crammed into one smoky room. This is no palace. This isn't even a sanctuary. But to you, the weary traveler, this medieval inn is salvation itself. Most people think medieval travelers stayed in castles or monasteries. The truth? Most nights were spent in places like this, beneath rough timber beams and straw roofs blackened with smoke, inside the rowdy inns that dotted Europe's dangerous roads. And what awaited inside was never comfort. It was survival. And tonight, we're going inside to see exactly what that meant.
The first thing most travelers noticed was the food, or what passed for it. Forget the feasts of lords and nobles. In the inn, supper was a single dish, the eternal stew. The pot was never emptied. Each morning it was set to boil, and into it went whatever could be found that day. A rabbit if fortune smiled, a squirrel if not, fish if you were near the coast, salted meat if you were inland. The scraps of yesterday thickened the broth of today. The bones of last week floated alongside the gristle of this one. Travelers joked, half seriously, that some inn stews had been cooking for years. Never fully extinguished, a grim alchemy of centuries in one cauldron, it was ladled into rough wooden bowls and served with bread. But not the soft golden loaves we imagine today. Medieval bread was hard, dense, often stale. These trenchers acted as edible plates, soaking up grease and stew until they were soft enough to eat. If you weren't hungry, they were tossed to beggars or pigs. Nothing was wasted, and through it all flowed ale. Thick, cloudy, sometimes sour, sometimes so dense a spoon could stand upright in it. Safer than water, ale was the one guarantee of the road. Laws dating back to the 1200s required inns to provide bread and ale for travelers, not as hospitality but as public service. If you arrived starving, you left heavy-bellied, but never certain if the meal would strengthen you or sicken you. But eating was only half the ritual. The true theater of the inn was the table. Long wooden boards stretched across the hall, scarred from decades of knives and spills. Travelers crowded onto benches, elbows pressed tight, bowls clattering, hands tearing bread from the same loaf. There was no privacy, no choice of company. To dine in an inn was to dine among strangers. Utensils were scarce. Knives were personal possessions carried by every man. Spoons might be shared, borrowed, or absent. Forks were rare oddities, seen only among the wealthy. Most ate with fingers, scooping stew, wiping grease onto cloaks. Table manners meant only this: avoid spilling too much and do not stab your neighbor when reaching across. Yet here, among the noise and grease, the lifeblood of the road flowed. Gossip passed quicker than any courier. A pilgrim spoke of visions at shrines. A soldier muttered of battles on distant fields. A merchant whispered of prices in Bruges or Florence. In an age without newspapers, the inn was the press, the rumor mill, the messenger, the voice of Europe itself. And when the bowls emptied and the ale mugs drained, the tables were not cleared for dessert. They were cleared for something else entirely. By day an inn was a place of stew and straw, noisy yet weary. By night it became something else entirely. The stew pot was emptied, the trenchers gnawed, but the night was far from over. The fire roared higher, mugs refilled, and the air thickened with smoke and laughter. Shadows leapt across the rafters as tankards slammed onto the boards. Strangers became companions or enemies in the flicker of the hearth. The inn by night was not rest, it was revelry. Not just drink, but sustenance. Safer than water, heavy with grain, it was drunk by men, women, and even children. A gallon a day was not unusual. Inside the inn it poured by the jug, but ale was more than survival. It loosened tongues. Merchants spoke freely of their profits. Pilgrims confessed sins they had not dared whisper in daylight. Soldiers bragged of spoils, and thieves listened. Every mug tipped back was an invitation to revelation, yet ale was also the fuel of chaos. It softened laughter into slurred songs, then sharpened it into quarrels. Voices rose, fists slammed, knives flashed. The line between camaraderie and violence was as thin as the rim of a cup. Carved from bone, rattling across ale-stained boards, dice games were the great equalizer of the road. Simple, fast, and merciless. A lucky throw could fill a purse. An unlucky one could empty it before dawn. Cheating was rampant. Coins vanished beneath palms, dice weighted or swapped. Accusations flew as quickly as the dice themselves. And when patience broke, fists followed. Records from London in 1273 outlawed the drawing of swords in taverns, fining offenders 20 shillings. The law itself proves the scale of the problem. Swords were drawn often enough to require penalties. Smaller knives, however, were everywhere. A man carried his blade for supper, but it could become a weapon in an instant. The innkeeper's cudgel was never far. Not to stir stew, but to crack heads. Music in the smoke, but not every night ended in bruises and broken teeth. Some ended in song. Minstrels wandered from inn to inn, trading melodies for supper and a corner of straw. They strummed lutes, plucked fiddles, or sang ballads of saints' battles and lovers lost. Storytellers performed epics of Troy or the chansons of Charlemagne. Even jesters tumbled, their antics rewarded with scraps of cheese or a mug of ale. If no entertainers were present, the guests themselves became the chorus. Rowdy drinking songs filled the rafters, each verse more slurred than the last. Pilgrims sang of shrines, soldiers of victories, peasants of harvests. By the 10th verse, even the inn's cat might yowl along. For travelers, these nights were a rare spark of joy in a hard life. The music lifted weary spirits, even if it ended in arguments or bruised ribs. But beneath the laughter, something more enduring traveled. News. A farmer from one village carried word of blight. A merchant from another city spoke of rising grain prices. A pilgrim told of plague in Florence. Gossip spread along the benches, drifting from ear to ear, carried to the next inn the following night. In this way, inns became Europe's lifelines of communication. In an age without printing presses or reliable messengers, the world was stitched together by rumor told over ale. Yet not all who listened did so for news. Thieves lurked in every crowd. Some posed as fellow travelers, buying drinks and throwing dice before quietly following their victims to bed. Others needed no disguise. An innkeeper himself might point out wealthy guests to brigands in exchange for a share of the spoils. Inside the inn, as much as outside it, you were never safe. The final mug is drained. The fire collapses into a bed of embers. Slowly, the raucous hall changes. Benches are shoved aside. Tables are pushed against the walls. Straw is scattered across the ale-soaked floor. The same room that rang with music and laughter now becomes a dormitory. For the weary traveler, it is time to sleep, or at least to try. The cheapest rest was on the floor. Straw in a corner, shared with anyone who could pay the same meager fee. Rats skittered through the shadows, bold enough to dash across boots or cloaks. Fleas thrived in the straw, biting exposed skin until morning. For those with more coin, there were beds. Yet the word deceives. A bed was a wooden frame with sagging ropes, a mattress stuffed with straw, hay, or, if fortune smiled, wool. The ropes loosened, sinking bodies into the middle, pressing travelers together until they lay cheek to jowl like salted fish in a barrel. Sheets, when provided, were seldom washed. Town councils in 14th century England passed laws forcing innkeepers to launder bedding at least once every 3 months. The fact such a law was needed says everything about the state of medieval hygiene. Privacy was rare. A bed meant for 2 might be sold to 4. Strangers climbed in, cloaks tossed aside, boots stacked beneath, and rolled shoulder to shoulder. One night your companion might be a farmer. The next a thief. Complaints did little good. The innkeeper's motto was simple: there is always room for one more, especially if one more has coins, and so they slept in suffocating closeness. The air was thick with sweat, sour ale, and the musk of wet wool. Snores rattled the rafters. Coughs hacked through the night. Bedbugs crawled. Lice burrowed into seams. Fleas bit without pause. It was not restful. It was survival. Only the richest travelers escaped the communal crush. Merchants, knights, or nobles might secure a private chamber. But even there, solitude was fragile. The doors had no locks. The walls were thin. Vermin ignored wealth, and even a noble's bed was rarely his alone. A servant might curl at his feet, a guard might sleep across the doorway. Companionship was constant, whether wanted or not, and in the shadows. Rats gnawed bags, mice scampered across floorboards, and the scuttle of claws was as common as the breathing of men. Yet out of this closeness came something unexpected: intimacy. Pilgrims whispered their journeys before drifting into snores. Merchants traded routes in hushed tones. Soldiers swapped war stories. Strangers became companions, even friends. Some forged alliances, others romances in the darkness of straw beds. The communal dormitory was not only a breeding ground for vermin and disease, it was a forge of connection. For better or worse, travelers woke not just with aching bones, but with stories that would follow them down the road. But under it all, unease never left. A coin purse was clutched under the pillow. A knife kept hidden beneath the blanket. Trust was thin, and danger could strike even within the supposed safety of the inn's walls. For here lay the cruelest irony of all. The greatest threats of the medieval road did not always wait outside. Sometimes they shared your bed, and this is where the inn story darkens further. Because it was not only vermin or snores that plagued the night, it was theft, fire, and plague. Rules were written to protect travelers, but they were broken as easily as clay mugs. In our next chapter, we'll step deeper into the underbelly of the inn, the dangers, the laws, the crimes, and how these filthy, perilous shelters became the very backbone of Europe's roads.